Myo Renge Kyo Nam Myo Renge Kyo Nam Myo Renge Kyo. Okay, hi everyone. Time for part 3 of our continuing reading of a conversation between a sage and an unenlightened man. So, we left off where the interlocutor, the unenlightened man, quote unquote, is sort of resisting some of the sages in this dialogue scholarship by not challenging the scholarship, mind you, but by challenging that sorry, as I adjust my camera here, apologies, that these great scholars of the past, even those that have written things outside the scholarship, rose to some eminence and therefore should be respected for what they achieved in their time. And so Nichiren is now going to address that idea that because somebody achieved greatness at one point doesn't mean that they should be honored forever unless. And so I'm going to let Nichiren take it from here. The sage replied, quote, "What you say is quite correct, and I too had great respect for these men and believed in them as you do. Believed in them, respected them. But in matters of Buddhist doctrine, one cannot jump to conclusions simply on the basis of the eminence of the person involved. The words of the sutras are what must come first. Do not make light of a teaching just because the person who preaches it is of humble station. The fox of the kingdom of Bhima, who recited the 12-character verse that goes, quote, 'There are those who love life and hate death. There are those who love death and hate life,' end quote, was hailed as a teacher by the god Shakra. And the demon who recited the 16-character verse that begins, quote, 'All is changeable, nothing is constant,' end quote, was treated with great honor by the boy Snow Mountains. This was done, however, not because the fox or the demon was of such eminence, but simply out of respect for the doctrines they taught.'" So I bet you can guess that what this part of this teaching is going to demonstrate. Quote, "Therefore, in the 6th volume of the Nirvana Sutra, his final teaching, delivered in the grove of sal trees, our merciful Shakyamuni Buddha, the Lord of Teachings, said, quote, 'Rely on the law and not upon the persons,' end quote. Even when great bodhisattvas, such as Universal Worthy, great bodhisattvas such as Universal, and Manjushri, men who have returned, you'll look in the definition for what that means, to the stage of near perfect enlightenment, expound the Buddhist teachings. If they do not do so with the sutra text in hand, then one should not heed them." So let's talk for a moment of those who have returned. There's always this question in Buddhism, there's and this is part of the translation problem, I believe, this birth-death issue, as though birth and death is something that happens once in your lifespan, and then there's another birth and death. You must understand that birth and death is in each and every moment. And this example of the men who have returned, when talking about bodhisattvas, is not that they died and came back. This isn't Christianity. This isn't about resurrection or coming back from the dead, okay, or a second life. This is about returning from that place of Buddhahood. When you really achieve awakening, enlightenment, the Buddha state of mind, you're completely detached from mundane things, mundane life, mundane processes. For all intents and purposes, your mind is detached from this body. It doesn't need it. But rather than just letting this body fall to the ground dead and your awakening then expires with your consciousness, because there's nothing after this life, Buddhahood is something you can only experience here and now, in this life. Therefore, Buddha said, this life is itself enlightenment. What you detach from is all the veils of attachments that keep us in this mundane world, preoccupied with our emotions, our monkey mind, our sufferings. So returned doesn't mean died and came back. Returned means choosing, instead of staying in that completely detached mind state, to re-engage the body without attachment in order to use it as a vehicle to help others find the Buddha way. So the Buddha lives in all of us. It lives in our minds. This body is bodhisattva. Do you see the difference? A bodhisattva, a fully enlightened, fully awakened bodhisattva, knows the Buddha way, has touched, felt, experienced the Buddha way. But in this human form, in these tendencies and conditions, this samsara, that Buddha way must be led to. People need to discover within their own reality that Buddha way as human beings. So to be a bodhisattva, a fully enlightened bodhisattva, is to have known the Buddha way and to maintain this form as human to help others to attain that Buddha way. This is bodhisattva. So I get questions all the time, not all the time, but quite often, do you know any Buddhas? Have you attained Buddhahood? Those are weird questions to answer because they demonstrate a lack of understanding of the mental exercise that is Buddhism. Buddhism is a science of the mind, if you will. So the Buddha way is a conscious awakening. And the consciousness is in this mundane samsaric reality. So the two are intertwined. And the way we experience it in this life is as fully accomplished bodhisattvas. Right? So I hope that clears that up a little bit. The great teacher Tendai states, that which accords with the sutras is to be written down and made available, bodhisattva. But put no resolute mind and conviction in anything that in word or meaning fails to do so. Here we see that one should accept what is clearly stated in a text of the sutras, but discard anything that cannot be supported by the text. The great teacher Dengyo says, quote, depend upon the preachings of the Buddha, and do not put resolute mind and conviction in traditions handed down orally. Are you listening, Angikuden people? Which expresses the same idea as the passage from Tendai's commentary. And Bodhisattva Nagarjuna says that one should rely on treatises that are resolute mind and conviction to the sutras, but not rely on those that distort the sutras. This passage may be understood to mean that even among the various sutras, one should discard the provisional teachings put forth prior to the Lotus Sutra and put one's resolute mind and conviction in this sutra, the Lotus. Thus, both sutras and treatises make it perfectly clear that one should discard all teachings other than the Lotus. Now, nowhere in all the 5,000 or 7,000 volumes of sutras listed in the Kaihuan era catalog do we find a single scriptural passage that expresses disapproval of the Lotus Sutra and advises one to discard it or to cast it aside, nor any passages that say it is to be classified among the sundry practices and abandoned. If you disagree, you had better find some reliable passage from the sutras that will support your view, so that you may rescue Shantao and Honen from their torments in the hell of incessant suffering. The practitioners of the Nembutsu in our present day, priests as well as ordinary laymen and women, not only violate the words of the sutras, but also go against the instructions of their own teachers. Shantao produced a commentary in which he described 5 kinds of sundry practices that should be abandoned by practitioners of the Nembutsu. Referring to these sundry practices, the Nembutsu chosen above all says, quote, Shantao states as follows, quote, concerning the first of the sundry practices, that of reading and reciting the sutras, with the exception of reciting the meditation on the Buddha Infinite Life Sutra and the other sutras that preach rebirth in the Pure Land, the embracing, reading, and recitation of all other sutras, whether Mahayana or Hinayana, exoteric or esoteric, is to be regarded as a sundry practice. Concerning the third of the sundry practices, that of worshipping, with the exception of worshipping the Buddha Amida, the worshipping of or honoring of any other Buddhas or Bodhisattvas or deity of this world is to be regarded as a sundry practice. Concerning the fourth of the sundry practices, that of calling on the name, with exception of calling on the name of the Buddha Amida, calling on the name of any other Buddha or Bodhisattva or deity of this world is to be regarded as a sundry practice. Concerning the fifth of the sundry practices, that of praising and giving offerings with the exception of praisings and offerings directed to the Buddha Amida, the praising of and giving of offerings to any other Buddha or Bodhisattva or deity of this world is to be regarded as a sundry practice. This passage of commentary is saying that with regard to the first sundry practice, that of reading and reciting sutras, there are fixed rules for priests and lay believers of the Nembutsu, both men and women, concerning which sutras are to be read and which are not to be read. Among the sutras that are not to be read are the Lotus, Benevolent Kings, Medicine Master, Great Collection, Heart Sutra, Woman Born as a Man to Become a Buddha, and life-prolonging Northern Dipper Sutras. And in particular, among the 8 volumes of the Lotus Sutra, the so-called Perceiver of the Law, here I go with my page turning. Perceiver of the World Sound Sutra, which is commonly read by so many people. If one reads so much as a single phrase of a single verse of these sutras, then although one may be devoted practitioner of the Nembutsu, one is in fact grouped among those who will follow sundry practices and cannot be reborn in the Pure Land. Yet now, as I observe the world with my own eyes, among those who chant the Nembutsu, I see many people who read these various sutras, thus going against their teachers, and thereby committing one of the 7 cardinal sins. In addition, in the passage concerning the third kind of sundry practices, that of worshipping, it is said that with the exception of the worshipping of Amida, flanked by 2 honored bodhisattvas, the worshipping or honoring of any other of the earlier mentioned Buddhas, bodhisattvas, or heavenly gods and benevolent deities is to be regarded as a sundry practice and forbidden to practitioners of the Nembutsu. But Japan is the land of the gods. It was created by the august deities Izanagi and Izanami. The sun goddess deigns to have her dwelling here, and the Mimosuso River, for many long ages, down to the present, has continued to flow through the grounds of which her shrine is located. How could anyone who was born in this country heed such an erroneous doctrine? In addition, as we have been born under the all-encompassing sky and enjoy the benefits of the 3 kinds of luminous bodies, the sun, the moon, and the stars, it would be most fearful thing if we should show disrespect to the gods of these heavenly bodies. So here he's talking about how the history of Buddhism has always respected time, capacity, and place. Again, in the passage concerning the fourth kind of sundry practices, that of calling on the name, it says that there are certain names of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas that the Nembutsu believer is to call on, and certain names of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas that he is not to call on. The names he is to call on are those of Amida Buddha and his two honored attendants. The names he is not to call on are those of Shakyamuni, Medicine Master, Mahavarachana, and the other Buddhas. Those of Bodhisattvas, Earth Repository, Universal Worthy, and Manjushri, the gods of the sun, moon, and stars, the deities of the shrines in Izu and Hakone, Mishama Shrine, Kumano Shrine, and Haguro Shrine, the sun goddess and great Bodhisattva Hachiman. If anyone so much as once recites any of these names, then, although he may recite the Nembutsu 100,000 or 1,000,000 times because he committed the error of calling on the name of one of these Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, the gods of the sun and moon, and other deities, he will fall into the hell of incessant suffering and fail to be reborn in the Pure Land. What is this thing with rebirth in the Pure Land, right? But when I look around in the world, I find that Nembutsu believers who call on the names of these Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, various heavenly gods and benevolent deities, thus in this matter as well, they are going against the instruction of their own teachers. So why is Nichiren going through all of this? I think he's trying to take apart his interlocutor's argument. You say these are all eminent, should be followed, but look at what's happening. That's nice words, but they're meaningless because nobody follows them because they're ineffectual. They don't work. In the passage concerning the fifth sundry passage, that of passing and giving offerings to the Nembutsu believer is enjoined to make offerings to the Buddha Amida and his two Bodhisattva attendants. But if he should offer even a little bit of incense or a few flowers to an earlier mentioned Buddha, Bodhisattva, or heavenly gods and benevolent deities, then although the merit he has gained from the Nembutsu practice may be laudable because of the error he has committed, he is condemned to be classified among those who look around the world, who carry out sundry practices. And yet, when I look around the world, I see the Nembutsu believers paying visits to various shrines and offering streamers of paper or cloth, or entering various Buddhist halls and bowing in reverence there. In this, too, they are going against the instruction of their teachers. If you doubt what I say, then look at the text of Nembutsu chosen above all. It is very clear on these points. Again, the teaching on Meditation Sutra by the Reverend Shantao says, quote, with regard to intoxicants, meat, and the 5 strong flavored foods, one must vow never to lay a hand on them, never to let one's mouth taste them. One must pledge, quote, if I should go against these words, then may foul sores break out on both my body and mouth. The meaning of this passage is that the Nembutsu believers, men and women, lay believers, nuns and priests alike, must not drink wine and must not eat fish or fowl. In addition, they must not eat any of the 5 strong flavored foods, the pungent or strong smelling foods, such as leeks or garlic. If any Nembutsu believers fail to abide by this rule, then in their present life they will find foul sores breaking out on their bodies, and in the next life they will fall into its hell of incessant suffering, right? In fact, however, we find many Nembutsu laymen and laywomen, nuns and priests, who pay no heed to this prohibition, but drink as much wine and eat as much fish and fowl as they please. They are, in effect, swallowing knives with which to wound themselves, are they not? Thereupon, the unenlightened man said, quote, in truth, as I listen to your description of the doctrine, I can see that even if the Nembutsu teaching could in fact lead one to rebirth in the Pure Land, its observances and practices are very difficult to carry out. And of course, since the sutras and treatises upon which it is based all belong to the category of provisional expositions, it is perfectly clear that it can never lead to rebirth in the Pure Land. because now his eyes are open to what the sutras actually say, instead of what these commentaries and these people are trying to impose. So you have to worry about authoritarianism in everything. And it happens in teachings, religions especially. Religions are all about authoritarianism, right? But even in Buddhism, we have sectarian politics that enter into play, and they try to control their populations to follow them only. It's very egotistical, and it's not the Buddha's teachings. How can you prohibit people from mentioning Shakyamuni Buddha or following his teachings when he founded what you're practicing? How does that make sense? How could Ford Motor Company tomorrow disavow anyone named Ford? I don't understand it. But, this was 13th century, so if your sword was bigger, you were the authority, right? But surely there's no reason to repudiate the true word teachings. The Mahavajracana Sutra constitutes the secret teaching of Mahavajracana, the king of enlightenment. It has been handed down in an unbroken line of transmission from the thus come one Mahavajracana to Shan Wu Wei and Puk Ung. And in Japan, the great teacher Kobo spreads the teachings concerning the mandalas of the diamond realm and the womb realm. These are secret and arcane teachings that concern the 37 honored ones. Therefore, the most profound doctrines of the exoteric teachings cannot compare even to the elementary stages of the esoteric teachings. Hence, the great teacher Chisho from Goto-in Temple stated in his commentary, even the Lotus Sutra cannot compare to the Mahavajracana, much less the other doctrines. Now, what is your view on this matter? The great sage replied, "At first, I too placed my trust in the thus come one Mahavajracana and desired to carry out the teachings of the true word school. But when I investigated the basic doctrines of the school, I found that they are founded on views that are in fact a slander of the correct teachings. The great teacher Kobo of Mount Koya, of whom you have spoken, was a teacher who lived in a time of Emperor Saga. He received a mandate from the emperor directing him to determine and explain the relative profundity of the various Buddhist teachings. In response, he produced a work of 10 volumes entitled Treatise on the 10 Stages of the Mind. Because this work is so broad and comprehensive, he made a condensation of it in the 3 volumes, which bears the title The Precious Key to the Secret Treasury. This work describes 10 stages in the development of the mind. From the first stage, the mind of lowly man, goatish in its desire, to the last stage, the glorious mind, the most secret and sacred. He assigns the Lotus Sutra to the 8th stage, the Flower Garland Sutra to the 9th stage, and the true word teachings of the Mahavajracana Sutra to the 10th stage. Thus he ranks the Lotus Sutra as inferior even to the Flower Garland Sutra, and as 2 stages below the Mahavajracana Sutra. In this work, he writes each vehicle that is put forward is claimed to be the vehicle of Buddhahood, but when examined from a later stage, they are all seen to be mere childish theory. He also characterizes the Lotus Sutra as a work of wild words and ornate phrases, and disparages Shakyamuni Buddha as being lost in the region of darkness. Wow. This is all because at the time that this guy was reading this stuff, he didn't have the capacity to understand it. It wasn't the latter day yet. He didn't get it. He didn't understand it. A lot of people today still don't understand the Lotus Sutra and look at it as just a prose-filled, poetic, self-congratulatory writing. But that's because they haven't studied all of Buddhism. As Buddha Shakyamuni himself told his students, every one of us, study all of it. Don't follow the words, don't follow people, follow the law. And when you do that, then the clarity of the Lotus Sutra becomes very obvious. Because we today have the capacity. We today, this teaching, the Lotus Sutra, is for us, the Bodhisattvas of the earth. As a result, Kobo's disciple in a latter age, Shokakubo, the founder of Dembo-in Temple, was led to write that the Lotus Sutra is not fit even for a sandal tender for the Mahavarachana Sutra, and that Shakyamuni Buddha is not worthy even to serve as an ox driver for the thus come one Mahavarachana. Mahavarachana was invented by Shakyamuni. My goodness. Talk about how teachings can take a turn when ego takes control, right? Still your thoughts and listen to what I say. In all the 5,000 or 7,000 volumes of the sutras that the Buddha preached during his lifetime, or the 3,000 or more volumes of the Confucian and Taoist teachings, is there anywhere a passage clearly stating that the Lotus Sutra is a doctrine of childish theory, or that it ranks 2 stages below the Mahavarachana? See, this is what happens when you study broadly. All of those weird opinions that just fall aside as so much chatter, right? Being inferior to the Flower Garden Sutra as well, or that Shakyamuni Buddha is lost in the region of darkness and is not worthy even to serve as an ox driver to the thus come one Mahavarachana. It's his method. And even if such a passage did exist, one would certainly have to examine it with great care. When the Buddhist sutras and teachings were brought from India to China, the manner of translation depended upon the inclination of the particular translator. And there were no fixed translations for the sutras and treatises. Hence, the Tripitaka master Kumarajiva of the latter Qin dynasty always used to say, quote, "When I examine the Buddhist teachings as they exist in China, I find that in many cases they differ from the Sanskrit originals. If the sutra translations that I have produced are free from error, then after I am dead and cremated, my body, since it is impure, will no doubt be consumed by the flames, but my tongue alone will not be burned," end quote. And when he was finally cremated, his body was reduced to a pile of bones, but his tongue alone remained, resting on top of a blue lotus blossom and emitting a brilliant light that outshone the rays of the sun. What a wonderful thing. And on that note, we will continue with this dialogue in part 4. Thank you so much for listening, for participating. I so honor and appreciate your practice. Please keep going. Help me. Put some comments and questions, and we'll talk again soon. Okay? Bye. Namo Myoho Renge Kyo.